So it says all, both of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they say all. But we actually built our democracy and our economy on this notion of.
Hello, community. On this episode of Centering Conversations, we have our guest, Ashleigh Gardere, the President of PolicyLink. Ashleigh is a leader dedicated to a future where everyone in the nation can thrive. She has remained committed to making that future real in partnership with common and uncommon partners. Throughout her 20-plus career, she has witnessed the power of collaboration to deliver meaningful change. She has helped accelerate systems transformation and equity through executive roles in government, business, and the nonprofit sector. Now serving as the president of PolicyLink, a research and action institute, she is focused on redesigning the nation to work for all. She understands that realizing a flourishing, multiracial democracy requires new values and governing standards in service of our collective flourishing. New ways of working between government and communities, and new ways of being individually and as part of institutions. Ashleigh, I am so thrilled to have you on Centering Conversations. This is just a platform where we lift up Black women who are leading in philanthropy, leading in community. And I am grateful that you've accepted this invitation, and I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Shonda. It's an honor, especially in this moment, given all that's happening, first, just to be seen and to be able to see you. I'm grateful. So just thank you for the opportunity to be in conversation.
Thank you. I was at the PolicyLink Summit in Atlanta, and there was some good news that was shared there. So as part of your introduction, can you share a bit about that moment? And then for those listening, who you are, what you do?
Yes. Well, thank you for coming to the summit. It felt like an important moment for the ecosystem and the movement, and helping us to prepare for this right now moment too. So I'm Ashleigh Gardere. I currently serve as president at PolicyLink. That was the announcement at the summit. And I just got to say, lots of things have happened in my life, personally and professionally. There was no greater gift to arrive at that moment and to be in community with folks in the announcement of the presidency. And inside of a moment that is about sharing leadership, right? So also just need to honor Michael McAfee, who served as the president and CEO of PolicyLink. And the truth is, it was his choice. He came to me and said, well, let's talk about when you're going to become president. And I have a way of politely hanging up on folks when there is a conversation that I haven't yet prepared for. And when we revisited the conversation, the idea that he recognized that there was something important about both of our leadership and that each one of us had something uniquely to give to PolicyLink and to offer to the field, that's never happened to me before. And so just want to say thank you for even remembering that, but also the gift not only of the co-leadership stance, but also being in community with folks, and that it wouldn't be a secret or a silent thing that we did, but that we shared it with folks at the summit and that folks responded so powerfully was just a real gift.
I think that was a real demonstration of leadership across the board. And in a time where people are looking to secure leadership, diverse leadership, younger leadership into the workforce, I think there are some places that have demonstrated and modeled that really well. It also feels like a moment of tension because the word shared leadership is challenging because we approach the work really differently sometimes, and we don't always have space for different.
Mm-hmm. that might have been the perfect segue setup to who am I? And
Yeah.
so because I think that my leadership journey has been about these tensions and holding tensions, and even how we navigate the individual and the collective. So what I would say is I am from New Orleans, but my parents are not. So that would be the original tension, right? So like if you are raised in New Orleans, the most welcoming version is for you to be able to give your whole family line, like 7 generations. My husband can do that. I cannot. My parents are from upstate New York. My dad from Buffalo, mom from Rochester. They met at Howard University in DC. And then my dad was drafted into the army to fight in Vietnam. And so when he got back, my mother was really clear she did not want to be an army wife. So he took a civilian post at the Navy base here, and another tension, army man in the working for the Navy, and so they got stationed here in New Orleans. It was supposed to only be 3 years. It's been 42.
Okay.
And we're still here. The reason that that matters is because we didn't know anybody in New Orleans. And so one of the first choices that they made was to settle in a Black Baptist church in New Orleans. And very quickly, what was church family became chosen family. And in a city where like not having grandmothers should have been like a whole thing, I ended up with my 2 biological and 2 New Orleans matriarch grandmothers. And what I would say, and all the cousins and aunts and uncles that came with them. And what I would say is that like it was the chosen family that taught me abundance. I feel like abundance was one of the very first lessons of my life, because no surprise, many of our grandmothers, given the design of our nation, low income, fixed income, and yet every Sunday there would be enough food to feed
That's right.
40 of us, right? And it was about not just what they cooked, but what we all brought. And so I think an early lesson was really around, when everybody contributes, there's always enough. And then, the next moment of tension, let's fast forward to I'm now 8. Well, the church split. There were 2 different visions, right? Like there were the elders and the younger pastor, and it didn't work out. And so we showed up to church and the locks were changed on the doors. And I'm telling the truth.
Look, I've lived this truth twice at
right?
least. Mm-hmm.
And so that Sunday, we ended up having church on the adjacent parking lot. And again, an early lesson. I think that was my first existential crisis, right? Like grown-ups behave like this, and what's going on, and where's all the values I've been taught? But out of that crisis, we established a new church. And at 8 years old, somehow I was a founding member of this new church, and a church rooted in Black liberation theology. That was not the previous model. A church that got to commit, like we named our commitment to wanting to be in deep community, like deep in community, not just situated next door to folks. And so all that's just to say that in that, I feel like I learned that sometimes these crises open up opportunities that we never would have chosen for ourselves, but that make us stronger, that we see more possibility, and we do work that we should have been willing to do before, but that we hadn't taken on. And then I'll spare you the long journey, but much of my rites of passage into adulthood, there were more crises, right? So from 9/11, as a college student, supposed to be taking care of other people's children, as a resident assistant, to coming home just in time for Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Time and time again, I got to learn this lesson about the importance of absolutely grieving the loss, and recognizing the tragedy, but also from a very early age, recognizing I can survive this.
Mm-hmm.
But even more than that, that there's an opportunity to build something far greater than I would have considered, than we would have considered in the case of New Orleans, if we had just kept doing what we do on a sunny Tuesday.
Yeah, there's so many directions I want to go, and I will even try to get there in this conversation. But in this thread, what you've got me reflecting on is just grief, or these moments that crisis comes into leadership in life. And what showed up for me just now is that women in particular, maybe Black women, but women will often set aside what might be at home that is a crisis and what you're dealing with from how you show up at work because of the demand or the judgment or whatever it is, the survival tactic that we have that says, okay, this is happening over here. And underneath my leadership, there's a whole crisis happening. But I'm going to come here and I'm going to be buttoned up and I'm going to show that I've got it all together. And I think that there is something really powerful about leaning into our whole selves in the way that you just said, which is, what am I learning from this? And how is it sharpening my leadership? How is it sharpening my vision? What is this trying to teach me? Why do you think that's been so valuable to how that's shown up in your leadership?
Well, because we're going to fail. We're not going to win every time.
Yeah.
We're not going to win every time. And I think if there was a gift from, kind of an exciting early start, so much of what I think we often try to avoid is failing, and certainly failing publicly, right? Like anything but that. And some of that is tied to being Black and being a Black woman and like all of that. It's the very thing that gives you courage.
Yeah.
To take on the next thing, and the next thing at a higher level. Like all of a sudden, the stakes don't seem as high because on some level, the worst thing that could happen has already happened. It is true. I lost my whole city. The two matriarchs that helped raise me aren't here anymore. So if you ask you like, and that feels worse than like losing something professionally. And yet the loss, to your point, informs how I move professionally. Like now, let's do it. Like there's not much left to lose.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective. I think there are those of us that can go through a loss, they can grieve the loss, but not become a victim of the circumstance. There are a lot of people that are feeling like something is being done to us, right? Whether or not it was, I'm in Minneapolis, so George Floyd, or the different things that come up, the way that perhaps administration even responded to Katrina. We all know that was a failure. And so there's all kinds of ways to look at circumstances when they come, and it's not a denial of how tragic they can be, but how much does owning your own story help with the survival through these moments? Because I think it's important that we talk about that just a bit.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I just want to repeat what you said. It's not that something isn't happening to us.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's not even that some ones aren't happening to us. They are.
Yeah.
And so I never want to like run past that. I'm tickled this last fall. I tried to hurry up and get back to the work instead of grieving the thing. And my body was like, okay, well, you do the best you can without us. Right. Like, I want to be really clear. Like, the losses are real losses. And the grief is real too. The reason that I think I've learned to accept the start of my story at 8 years old with the church split and standing outside like what is happening is because how many people that early get to feel their agency in that powerful of a way to like be able to establish a new institution out of it. Um, and so I don't want to minimize that that's unusual. um, but it matters. And I would say the other thing, all things that have been formative, was that, by teenage years, I got to really study under the wing of civil rights leaders. So Jerome Smith here in New Orleans, we refer to him as Big Duck because they always say he always looked like the big duck with little ducks behind him. That's how deep his commitment to young people and really building future leaders is. Um, but it was a social justice camp, 21st, I'm sorry, Tambourine and Fan first. Tambourine and Fan was the name of the social justice camp here in New Orleans. And it was all about making sure we understood our history and the history of the civil rights movement. And that as a 14-year-old, I would be a camp counselor expected to learn it so that I could teach it to 5-year-olds. And I remember being 14 and even the 5-year-olds having to memorize Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. Those lyrics are not children's lyrics, right? And yet having that in our heart and it almost was, he was trusting that we could handle learning about the responsibility of leadership that young. And then, he saw potential in me. And so I was one of a set of young people who got to then go to 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement, founded by Rose Sanders in Selma, Alabama. And they, again, poured in history, a leadership creed that would make clear what their expectations were for us as grown-ups. I'm 44 years old. That creed still comes to me regularly because it's an expectation. And so I guess long way of saying to your question, some of it was because the training for folks who really lost, who sacrificed a lot, even just for us to be able to have this conversation, to be able to hold their sacrifice helps remind me that so much of whatever I've suffered and endured still wasn't that. So I still wasn't more room, and more room and ability to live into the expectation that they set.
One of the things that you're sharing that I know is not part of everyone's experience, but I think it's important to pull out is the importance of positive self-identity, right? Which I think comes from being rooted in history and relationships that are reflective of not everything that is bright and shiny, but that is true, and being able to understand sort of the layers of history that sit within our DNA and within our community. And I think this is why, school curriculum and inclusive environments are so important when folks are young, because it establishes exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say that one of the other lessons from, the early years was that institutions matter. We actually need institutions to do this work through. It's awesome to have individual leaders, but what's possible in community, for me, feels far greater. And then the lens that you all even take for these conversations about philanthropy, right? And the role of philanthropy matters the world because institutions matter. I think they help to deliver some of that relationship, even when it's not formal, institutional philanthropy, just coming back to us all showing up with our individual contribution to make sure that everybody had what they needed. That, to me, that feels important.
I mean, that's such an important statement right now because we have many people that don't trust institutions, but we also have a growing sort of younger group of leaders that are almost anti-institutional or anti-leadership. right? And the search for justice and navigating that, right? And so often it becomes even a community conversation, right? Of us inside of formal institutions versus those on the ground, as though it's an either or proposition. And what I hear you saying is that it is not, in fact, an either or, but all are necessary.
Yes.
And I know PolicyLink just moved to the word all that has been heavily discussed.
Yes.
Can we talk about that? Why did you guys arrive at the all, and what does that mean relative to the conversation we're having now?
I'll share a little bit. I want to kind of now link my story to Michael's. I serve as president at PolicyLink. Michael serves as CEO. Before the 20 years of my career before PolicyLink was all in service to trying to deliver meaningful outcomes for Black people and Black people in New Orleans.
Okay.
I mean, I was very specific.
It's very specific. Black
right?
people and in New Orleans. Got
and
it.
in New Orleans, right?
Okay.
I love everybody, but I just didn't love everybody the same. Like my loyalty ran deep for my tribe, Black people in New Orleans. And so my record reflects that, like starting from neighborhood development work to recognizing that there were policies that were blocking folks in community from really having full access, to then stepping into city government and really trying to figure out how to use policy levers to deliver for everybody, but really because who was being left out, right? The data was showing that Black men in particular were folks who had just been sidelined. And in this case, 38,600 Black men, 52% of working age Black men in the city had just been excluded from our economy. I used every best practice because, you know, my degrees were shiny. I would left and got some so I could bring them back, right? So whether it was collective impact or data-driven decision-making or people-centered strategies, like starting with people first and then, right, all of the things we did so that I could literally, in partnership with folks across all sectors, across class, so that we could measurably make a difference for Black people and Black men in New Orleans. And I told you, we did. That non-employment rate went from 52% to 43.9% in 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
So like actually added up to something. And then over time, you've seen it just slide right on back, right? And my husband, who is a data person, would say it didn't go all the way back to 52%. Okay, I got you. I get your point. But it also has not, we plateaued and then we just continue to have a huge gap, right? So that was my experience. And talk about grief and loss. After 17 years of rebuilding New Orleans, at some point I was like, you know what, husband, I just need to come home. I just want to sit. I need a break. I'm tired. Now I'll skip over to Michael's experience. Michael was recruited to PolicyLink to scale Harlem Children's Zone, right? So Promise Neighborhoods, an initiative of the Obama administration, was designed to scale the outcomes that we saw from Jeff Canada's leadership of Harlem Children's Zone. And Michael did that. He delivered transformative outcomes for 300,000 children in this country. Have we closed the racial wealth gap? We have not. And so just two examples of two folks who like to believe that we're leaders, doing all the smart things that all the people told us to do, and delivering short-term results. And part of what we discovered in our grief was, you know what? this thing was actually never designed for everyone's thriving. It actually wasn't designed for us all to win. And so if that's true, then no matter how brilliant our interventions, the change won't hold. It actually can't endure. And how I talk about this is that we really have, if we just rewind the tape,
Mm-hmm.
All of the promises of our founding documents, I actually believe are right and good and worthy of us working towards. The challenge is our value system and none of the structures, not of our democracy nor our economy, were built to deliver on those words. So it says all, both of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they say all. But we actually built our democracy and our economy on this notion of winners and losers.
Right.
5 people supposed to win, everybody else just get it the best you can, right? And that's typically how we tell the story, right? Like everybody else. And so part of what PolicyLink was arriving at is that even we have gotten real slick and creative about saying all, right? All is in our equity definition, right? Just and fair inclusion into a society in which all people can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. That's what we said. But guess who we were working for?
Who was you working for?
Our tribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all the tribes, right? Because we have lots of different people at PolicyLink, but we got Black folks, we got brown folks, we got queer folks, but it was still us working for our folks. And what we arrived at is that we will actually never, like our governing structures will never deliver for all people if we can't manifest souls that love all people. It's just that simple, right? Like if we're not serious about the all, and if we keep leaning into this tribalism, but using all as a front just for our people, we actually none of us will actually get the fullness of the promise of this nation. And so I know that's tricky. The last thing I'll say about that is that, I think folks first experienced us as like, there were 2 questions. One was either, it just feels like you're whitewashing equity. And I reject that, right? Like, I'm just not doing that. We're not going to clean up stuff for folks who don't believe in this work anyway. Or I know it's right. That's the conversation we saw at the summit, right? Like some of the leaders who have been in this fight a long time saying, I know that all is right. It's what's left. But I just don't know if my heart can. I'm not sure I can get past my trauma to arrive in that place. And all I would say is, the first week of this year, never mind what's happening now, the first week of this year, there was a terrorist attack here in New Orleans. There was a bombing in Las Vegas. Even when we look at like the emergency response to the wildfires in Los Angeles, we keep coming back to the same basic question. Are we going to govern for all of us or are we not? And the longer that we wrestle, the longer we will continue to experience the consequences of our inability to see each other, to care for each other, to love one another, and that to be manifested in our governing institutions if we don't actually stop to do this heaviest of lifting.
I embraced it. I personally embraced it right away because I don't think it's a good strategy to repeat the strategy that is current, which is to leave people out. I also think that there was a clarity of the value proposition in it, right? What we're holding in the center. Like the center of our all is not centered by power and greed and extraction, right? It is centered by flourishing and abundance and justice, right? And equitable outcomes. The root of the center of all is very different
Yeah.
in the interpretation. So I felt that way. I also think that there was a good conversation on stage with Kendi
Yeah.
that really, I think, pushed those that might be more on the progressive side to think about how we might be contributing to some of the outcomes. And so when it's us against them, we don't look at us.
Oh, yeah.
We only talk about them. And so I think it's an interesting thing of the problem of the progressive and how we might be unintendedly contributing to some of the pain that we are experiencing.
I got to trust that how I'm showing up, first of all, is making room for you, right? Like that it actually creates space for you to show up in your leadership in all the ways that you want and need to. I have to trust that I've behaved in a way that has you know that my intentions are good, right? Now that means that has to be true. I have to have shown up that way, shown up in a way that makes you know that I truly do hold the humanity, like your humanity, and I care about you.
Right, right. Let's talk about this for a second because we are in a place where many things are being challenged, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a lot of language coming that is not for us to be using anymore, according to our government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is placing a lot of leaders in a really tough place,
Mm-hmm.
right? Choosing between, falling into that in order to get the resources to continue to do the work, or there might be decisions that have to be made that people question on all sides, right? Like, I don't want to get too political with it.
Yeah.
How can we think about separating out
Yeah.
decisions sometimes that you have to make from how you still can, like how you show up in the work? Like sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're very different. And
Yeah.
so leadership is just being so challenged. And I think you're illustrating a point in time where everything was sort of calm and it's like you entering into a new space and filling out the waters and then filling you out. And now we've got folks that on top of it, there's like tension over tension over tension, trying to navigate in a really difficult place where folks are questioning leadership and they're testing to say, are you who you say you were?
Mm-hmm.
In an environment that is pushing you to say stuff that you may not even agree with.
Yeah. So let's start there. This feels like a silly thing to say, but it has been a big learning journey, I think, for all of us. And certainly us at PolicyLink, we got to be willing to think for ourselves. Right. So what I mean by that is this, even before this moment that we're in right now, this idea about like, oh, I have to say it this way, otherwise they gonna think I'm not down. Or this conversation we just had about the all.
Yeah.
Okay, that was 2 years worth and counting of conversations inside the organization first, right? Where the best audience to test how folks were going to respond was our staff. And first of all, making space for it, like actually making room, that this was not an edict or Abby Langston, our vice president of research, says this is not catechism, right? Like what we're not asking you as staff to memorize what we're saying and repeat it. Like this is a journey that we have to go on together. There was a lot of innovation that took place, talking about governing, like in policy innovation, as a result of contestation and resistance of the civil rights movement. We came out of that with an Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. We came out of that first of a Civil Rights Act of 1957. We learned a lot about that. It was like, okay, that wasn't quite how it didn't go how we thought it should, right? So a Voting Rights Act, a Fair Housing Act. I would argue that all of those were policy innovations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we can acknowledge today in 2025 is that like innovation doesn't hold forever. Like different moment, like things evolve and it requires something different and more of us, right? Actually, PolicyLink's history is a great example of that. Like, can you imagine Angela showing up amidst civil rights organizations and she's talking about equity? Like, what?
Yeah.
So we have a framework. This is the framework, right? And I feel like that was an early lesson, even for me, about like there are different roles to be played.
There's different roles. What I also hear you saying is be focused on the work and intentional about the language, but don't let the language thwart your focus, right? Like, don't get so caught up, right? Because I mean, I remember working on something. I was like, we're not using words like diversity, equity, inclusion. It's not because we don't mean it. It is because they are performed in words quite a bit. And I think we need to demonstrate it. And I think it's an opportunity for us to bring everyone into that conversation differently when the words look different.
People often hear us just saying, like, are we going to fight about the words? Or is what we're actually fighting about living into the aspiration of those words, right? And so I just got really clear, like, I can't be fighting with you about these words and then lose the opportunity to do the work that would actually deliver on those promises. I just think it's also important, and then I promise to let it go, to just remember that our shift to all was not about this moment. It really was reckoning with the consequences that would be ongoing if we don't find our way back to each other, like humans back to each other, being able to see each other. It's killing us. It literally is killing us. And that's what led to our shift. It was not about a political moment or like if we do it this way. There's something, the summit title was Revolution of the Soul for a reason, right? It's because we actually don't believe that any of the brilliant interventions that we can come up with will hold if we can't hold all of us, even the people we don't agree with.
I think that's right. I think, the other piece that I've been pondering while you were talking is this, and I think you discussed it a little bit with Katrina and some of the journey of your leadership. Mm-hmm. And, in philanthropy in particular, and donors and others that maybe are less familiar with community, like on the ground community and neighborhoods, is that there's a belief that if you just pull this one lever, then it will eradicate this disparity, whatever reading or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And the way that movement happens is in a straight needle moving left to right. Sometimes it goes back and forth and it goes backwards and then forward. And I remember following George Floyd's murder and having some conversations with folks and saying that people understand it from a financial, economic point of view. You understand that there's bull and bear markets. You understand when the market's not performing. About compound interest and that if you just stick with it, eventually it's going to pay off. Mm-hmm. But on the impact side of work, when things go backwards, you're like, who did it?
Right.
It was the wrong strategy, right? And what they don't understand is that the trust equation just got moved because trust was broken in a very explicit way in community, or we were on the road, but this just happened, and now we got to sit with people to get them back at the table in a way that is honest and in community. And so, how do you all think about impact and policy at this particular moment that might shed a light on what we are all experiencing, which is a rolling back
Yeah.
and perhaps an opportunity, or almost always an opportunity, a crisis, if this is what we want to call it, presents opportunity for new leadership and new ideas and innovation.
Yeah. Well, literally how we're thinking about it is it goes back to what I said earlier. Oh, the thing was never designed for all of us anyway. It was not designed for collective flourishing. What I mean is the values were scarcity and competition and rugged individualism, not collective flourishing. And so there is not a policy intervention that will be brilliant enough that will hold over time. So our approach, and I know it sounds crazy because we're a policy organization, is yes, we're going to continue to advance what we believe are policies that deliver towards all. But we've also learned we got to, like, if there's a design flaw that is the problem, we have to go back and redesign. And so, what we want to invite folks to do starting tomorrow, in fact, is to join us in this redesign work. What are the values that would actually deliver a nation that works for all of us? We actually have to take the step back to redefine and articulate, codify those values. And then given those values, what would be the new legal theory that is required to deliver that, right? What I mean by that is when we think about the Fair Housing Act is a great example. The rights that I receive I have to prove to you that I've been discriminated against before anything happens. We've never actually in this country leaned into the affirmative duty of government. Like, instead of proving that I was discriminated against, that there's a law that actually guarantees that I get to have safe and affordable housing and I can choose where I want to live, right? Like, we never had a law like that. Same for water, right? It's like, okay, if you have lead in your pipes, we're obligated to come get the lead out. We don't promise that you won't have lead in your pipes, right? And so first, how can we articulate, codify the values that would demonstrate our promise to collective flourishing, the all, in our founding documents and in our equity definition? Then what would the legal theory that really leans into affirmative duty of government, what would that look like? And then given that, can you imagine if we set standards for governing? Like, in order to live into all, this is the standard, right? And from those standards, then what's the model policy? What's the model legislation, the model regulation that delivers that? Like, what's the playbook, literally, for people who are in governing seats? And then what's the field guide for those of us who are not in governing seats that helps us to activate our power about what we ought to demand?
Right. And so, I watched this clip that you posted, a video that you have on LinkedIn and maybe other places that talk about a different role, same goal.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems to me that part of what we're talking about is that, we all have a role to play in the country that we're aspiring to have.
Yeah.
And that it requires a number of things. One is looking at how things get redesigned. It also, I think what I'm hearing you say is it demands us to sit across the table with some unlikely allies. Because we can only move sort of points of view. We can only move when we're all in it.
Yeah.
And so talk about this statement that you made, different roles, same goal, and where that sort of came from, because I think that sort of encapsulates what you're saying right now to some extent.
Yeah. Well, part of what I think I was trying to figure out, what Michael and I are trying to figure out, is how, the minute that you feel the most pressure, when you feel like you're losing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think about football games, right? So, your team practiced all week for that opponent. You know, devised your strategy about how to play against that opponent and win. And then you get out there and the other team scores on you immediately. Right?
Yep.
The fans that were skeptical anyway were going to be like, why aren't we? Why aren't we? Right. And that, clearly I live in a household of football fans. Like I feel like I have learned a lesson about, like, just run the play that you practice. Right. And don't get distracted by the other thing. Um, I share that to say, to me, it illuminates the importance of roles and different roles. In this, I can't call this a game. It is not a game. But in this context, there are lots of roles that need to get filled. The one that I described to you, the one that PolicyLink is leaning into, is a building role. It's a dreaming role, right? But, if the promise is to dismantle government as we know it, we got to have defenders, right? There's a set of folks who we actually need to just defend the fundamentals of our democracy, defend the federal programs that actually deliver direct services to people who are most in need. We have to have defenders. Yep, we got to have dreamers. We got to have builders too. We got to have litigators, advocates, policymakers, storytellers, spiritual guides, healers.
Right.
We need all of those things. And, earlier I was talking about being courageous in our choice, like think for yourself and then be courageous in that choice. Whatever decision that you make, lean into it. And you don't have to, the part that Michael and I really have been trying to figure out how to talk about it. And then we don't have to turn on each other. Like this whole notion of different roles, same goal is that they're different roles and we can hold the same goal, but we don't have to blame the other person or minimize what their role is or nitpick or one up each other, because we actually do need each one of those roles in order to get to where we're trying to, like, a nation that actually works for all of us.
Yeah, let's just take a second about the turning on each other piece. I've seen demonstrations of that in many places where you have people within communities sort of, why are they doing that? Why are they getting that? You shouldn't have did it that way, calling people out, not having direct conversations. It all seems like an output of pain and fear from where I sit, but it also can be very distracting.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the main thing away from the main thing. So what would you say to folks that are just sitting in the middle of either being targeted or that maybe they are the one that has harshly judged out loud somebody else's work and from their seat?
In some ways, inside of PolicyLink, it's become all means all has become like our shorthand and an inside joke, even for our own behaviors, right? So, you get off a call with a partner and we would just cross ways with each other and like, I don't understand why they see it that way or whatever. And so then to have your colleague be like, Ashleigh, all means all.
All means out. Gotta hear it. Yep.
And so there's a bit of accountability in that for us too. It's not just pointed at like, no, we don't just mean white comfort anymore. All of that. It literally is, even if my commitment is better outcomes for Black people, I can't deliver that without delivering for all, as it turns out. I actually just can't. And so all that's to say, whether we're talking about a policy or governing outcome, or we're just talking about how we get along with each other, this all means all is going a long way around our own accountability to how we're showing up with and for each other, and not taking the bait, usually somebody else's bait, to accuse, separate, diminish
Right.
an ally. Or
And we could not agree with people and also not comment.
yes,
That's an
yes.
option. I think that's an option.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, complicated times. And so as we begin to wrap, I just want to talk about, because we started out with you being rooted in community. And I think when you are surrounded by love and opportunity and the reinforcement that your contribution matters, I think it provides a level of security that you will be held, right, in difficult times. And I think that is important in how we hold each other. And Black women are often at the center of that holding. And you talked about the grandmothers, the women in community. You called out a couple of those names, but one of those names is also your mother.
Yeah.
Who, is often talked about as the godmother of many in philanthropy. Do you want to say anything about her? And then I think I have a statement that I've heard her use about vision, but just say something about your mom.
First of all, just know that whatever I say will not be enough to reflect how I feel, but also her impact. What I can say, what I'll try to say, is that she has modeled the idea of community and the value of love, and I mean like unconditional love, more than anyone I have ever seen. Personally, for sure, but also professionally. I guess I was being polite and referencing the challenges, the losses, the resistance that civil rights leaders, the people we know and recognize, Black History Month as like official civil rights leaders. But having had the opportunity to have a close-up view of my mother's journey in philanthropy, a field that none of us knew about, she really was a forerunner. That she not only, there's a way of enduring hardship and challenge and like creating a path that can feeling sassy about yourself and what you did, and feeling accomplished, and taking like the victory lap that you so deserve, right? And that has never been Lynetta Gilbert's stance. That she taught me how to live into this. But people are like, what do you do? What's your work? It's like, oh, I hold the door open for others. That has been her example, and a tremendous contribution. So that when you see folks situated across philanthropy, across community development, across even just faith leaders, like the impact that she's had in helping people to earn those seats, to like the sharpening and the nurturing and the fussing at and the right, her willingness to have shown up in all of those ways for so many people, is still amazing to me. And so it is an honor for sure to be her daughter, to be, one of her first mentees. And she set the bar really high. And so back to your early question about like, well, how do you, when things go wrong and how do you bounce back? I don't have a choice. I know better, right? Like, yeah. And that each one of us, I think that's the greatest lesson from her, especially in this moment in both of our lives, that knowing, the understanding that the best we can do is make our greatest contribution in this long arc. But we ought to make it.
We ought to make it. And I wanted to bring it up because, my children are now grown. And I have one in particular that's leading in a loud, visible way in community, but they're all leading in their different ways. Yeah. And I remember when they were younger, the one who's leading out loud right now was like, I'm never going to do, you always gone. I ain't never going to work this hard, blah, blah, blah. And to see him now is sort of funny because I can hear all the things that he said when he was young. And my daughter and my, my sons, my other sons, and they're all contributing in their ways. Some more loud, some more quiet. But I bring it up because listening are going to be parents, and particularly mothers. And I know that you are a mom, and we are putting a lot out into community. And I think it is a very useful reminder of how we are modeling and who is watching us. And it often starts in our own community, in our home. And that's where you started with your leadership journey, is what you learned in your local community from leaders as a young child and in your home. And that is where a lot of times it sits. And even in these hard days, we're teaching good lessons.
Yeah.
If we're intentional about it. And so I'm assuming that that there were many lessons that you didn't know you were getting while you were getting them that showed up later in life.
Absolutely. 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 I will just say to folks who are in the work on this journey and parenting or expect to be parenting or want to parent, I learned more sitting in the back of those community meetings than any of my degrees could deliver. Not only about ways to practice the value of equity and sharing power, but also restraint and self-reflection. And that thing, remember we started talking about failure? Like, oh, that didn't go right. And still showing up the next day and repair, right? Like that, all of those things are certainly. I was a child who was watching, didn't even know I was, like theoretically I was doing my homework. Right. And I'm cognizant of, even with my own children. And some of it is what they hear us talking about, at the end of our days about meetings, but some of it is just in the listening to their day, like their days. And, the grown-ups, the same as the children. And so hearing me, say, oh, I didn't get that right. I was righteous now, self-righteous. And that was insufficient. And them hearing that, but also helping them to see that in their own work and make those connections, no matter what they choose to do, who they become, it is a contribution to this nation that we dream about, right? Where we can really see and love and care for each other.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I know that she says is your vision big enough? Mm-hmm. And in a moment that is really hard to get energy, right? Like my energy, like I've had a lot of personal loss. Like I'm like, look, I'm tired, all the things, right? But I keep thinking about the words, is my vision big enough? Is my vision big enough for my own work? Is my vision is big enough for what this community can do, what this country can do? And, do you think your vision is big enough at this point?
She would probably say no. But what I would say is this commitment to redesigning the nation so that it finally works for all of us, that feels pretty big to me. And the affirmation that it's big is because people don't believe us when we say that's what we're going to do. On first hearing, folks are like, that's cute. And my commitment from this seat is to create enough space in the doing of the work that folks can literally see their contribution, feel their agency and ownership, and take it on as their own, right? I think for me, that's what makes it big, is that it's not something that PolicyLink is trying to do and, just write our little idea down and go for it, but that we are trying to activate folks across this nation to believe that they can be co-founders of this nation and join us in the work. That feels pretty big.
It feels big, and it feels right in moments that can be and feel depressed.
Mm-hmm.
To have the option to participate in the creation of something new, right? To move your energy from defending to creating feels energy giving.
Yeah.
Right. From feeling erasure to feeling abundance. It feels like an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so you said it launches tomorrow. I know this podcast is not launching on tomorrow, but if they want to hear anything more about the vision of what you're bringing, you and Michael and team and all the contributors into the space, where might they go and find that?
I would say the easiest place to go is Ashleigh Gardere at LinkedIn, or Michael McAfee at LinkedIn, or PolicyLink at LinkedIn. And we try to stay consistent in posting the newest conversations, the ones that are upcoming. The last thing I would say maybe is, the result that the way we want to measure our work is that the 100 million folks in this nation who are currently economically insecure actually can thrive. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is there are 100 million people in this nation who, should they choose to be co-founders of this nation, have enough power, have enough brilliance and creativity to turn this thing around. And so that's where I find my energy, even when in those moments where it looks like there's just 5 people trying to do harm, there's at least 100 million of us, at least really can take up this mantle and make this nation what it would always promise to be.
Ashleigh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shonda.
That's it for this episode of Centering Conversations. Thank you for tuning in and centering yourself with us today. Remember, your voice has power, your vision has purpose, and your values guide your leadership and the way forward. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected for more conversations that inspire, ignite, and empower. Until next time, keep calling forth your purpose and centering your power.